So if you recall one of the last quotes that I shared on the exalted ministry of being a minister at the liturgy, it said that they should be deeply imbued with the spirit of the liturgy, meaning knowing what the liturgy is about, that our call is we come to liturgy to encounter Jesus, and as ministers, we are called to help others encounter Jesus. And then that they must be trained to perform their functions in a correct and orderly manner. So it's a balance of trying to figure out how do we know and encounter the Spirit of Christ in the liturgy, and then how do we exercise our functions and our ministries well, and how do we offer opportunities to grow in those ministries and to invite others into those ministries and lift one another up so that we live out what we are called to do. And I'll say that, some of the things that Christina shared could be said about just about all of our parishes in the Archdiocese and in most other churches around the world. So I wouldn't say that that's something that's completely unique here at Sacred Heart. There are always parts about each parish that are unique. As an example, right now before COVID, we would typically have 2 lectors at each of our masses at Nativity. Since we've started public masses back, our decision was to have 1 lector, fewer number of people coming to Mass, and also that means fewer number of people touching the books and doing things like that. So we have 1 lector. And it's been pretty good. This last Sunday, our 8:30 Mass, we were doing confirmations at that Mass, so adult confirmations that had been delayed from the spring. So before Mass, I was going around and checking in with those being confirmed, their sponsors, making sure everybody knew what was going on. And well, normally I would check to make sure we have a lector there and ready to go. Well, that didn't occur to me until I finished the opening prayer of the Mass, went to sit down, and thought, I wonder if there's a lector. And I look around, I know our lectors, I know who the lectors are, look around, nobody's walking up. Look around, I don't see any lectors. So I go over and do the readings myself. Somebody who was assigned didn't show up and didn't find a replacement. That happens. That's not where we're called to be. So how do we get there? How do we get to where we're called to be? And I think some of it is being imbued with the spirit of the liturgy. Those of us who are here, hopefully some who will watch these sessions on the video, but then in the ministry and the work that we do and the encounters we have with others here at the parish, how can we do that? And then how do we become trained to perform our functions in a correct and orderly manner? And rather than training, the word that I like to use is formation. Training to me gives off a little bit more of a sense of training for a task, to do a particular thing well, a task well. Whereas formation is a word we use more in the church to be formed into the person we are called to be. And if we are a hospitality minister, that means to be formed into the person of Christ who welcomes, rather than being trained in just the specifics of how to say good morning, or how to open a door, or to pass out bulletins. Those are important components to it, but the formation is more involved the whole person than just individual tasks. I also like this word formation because we use it a lot in the seminary. And so, as I've said, I'm the director of seminarians for the Archdiocese. We talk about formation for the priesthood, seminary formation. It's not just training future priests to know how to turn the pages in the missal and how to do the specific parts of the different sacraments. It's forming the whole person. So we use this word formation a lot. I think that's a good word to use for talking about liturgical ministries as well. In priestly formation, we're getting ready for a new set of guidelines and instructions for how priestly formation is done in the United States. Every 10, 15 years or so, we update the guidelines for priestly formation. And they're based on a document that comes from the Vatican that's then implemented in each country, particular to their own circumstances. And the new guidelines that we're getting ready to implement here in the United States, there are two main directions or sort of guiding principles that are being used. One is called gradualism, which is the idea that we become a disciple of Jesus Christ, and those who are called the priesthood become a priest gradually. It doesn't happen overnight. So it's gradual formation. We become disciples gradually. Some people have that aha moment of an encounter with God, but still after an aha moment, you have to learn to pray and learn how to be a part of a community. Most of us learn our faith gradually. So we do the same with priestly formation. It happens gradually over a period of years. This new set of guidelines for priestly formation, it will be a minimum of 7 years of formation for the priesthood. So it happens gradually. But the one I'd like to focus a little bit more on is the second guiding principle for priestly formation, which is integral formation. Integral formation. That there are different parts of this formation that are integrated. In some parts of the world, if you feel called to the priesthood, pretty much the entirety of your preparation for the priesthood is going to be academic. Studying philosophy and scripture and theology and church history. It's an academic preparation. That's not what the vision is for priestly formation. The vision for priestly formation is an integral formation that integrates academic formation with spiritual formation, growing as a person of prayer, developing a relationship with Jesus Christ, human formation, becoming a good human being who grows in virtue and in good relationships with the people around you, and pastoral formation, which is growing in how you interact with other people and how you serve the people of God. So that if you spend all of your time in priestly formation in a classroom studying and never out in a parish getting to know the people of God, you're not going to be not going to be as good a priest once you get out into the parish as a priest. You've got all the head knowledge, the information from the academic parts, but this integral formation says we need to spend just as much time in our seminaries helping future priests to get to know the people and to serve the people and to also grow in spiritual life and spiritual relationships and to grow in those basic human virtues of respect and kindness and love and compassion that are so important in all of our lives. And so I think that idea of integral formation can also say something to us about how we are formed for our liturgical ministries. Part of our formation for liturgical ministries is learning the very specific things about how to do what I need to do here at Sacred Heart. I like to pick on lectors because they're easy to pick on, I'm sorry, because I'm not picking on lectors, but using you as examples. I need to know where the lectionary is and where it's going to be. And I need to know if I'm reading the petitions, where are the petitions going to be? Do I get a copy of those that I can look at ahead of time? Where, or when I arrive, can I prepare so that I can proclaim those general intercessions well? I need to know where to find the scripture readings before I show up at church on Saturday evening or Sunday morning so that I have prepared them and read them ahead of time. So that ideally we would not have what happened at my parish 2 weeks ago, when the reading of Elijah in the cave was read. So remember Elijah in the cave? Elijah is in the cave on the mountain, and God is coming by the mountain, and he's not in the earthquake, he's not in the fire, he's not in the wind, but he's in the tiny whispering sound. Well, at one point during that reading, it says that God is rending the mountains. Rending the mountains. At 2 of our masses that weekend at Nativity, God rendered the mountains. To render, I mean, now most people might not pick up on this, but to render and to rend are 2 different things. You render fat. You cook down fat. You've got fat on a chicken breast that you put in a skillet. You render the fat. That's not the same as rending. To rend the mountains is to be present in a powerful way, almost like shaking the mountains. What I ended up thinking about during those readings is God is boiling down the mountains to get the fat out. So good formation, the practicalities mean being able to prepare those readings ahead of time. I imagine many of us have been to masses where we've heard a reading from the letter of St. Paul to the Philippines. That's good preparation. Those are the details of doing a liturgical ministry. But formation means that there's more. Formation, integral formation for a liturgical ministry, means that we focus on our own spiritual lives and grow in our own relationship with God. So for someone who's an extraordinary minister of Holy Communion, that might mean intentionally spending time in prayer in the presence of the Blessed Sacrament. Spending time in prayer with the Eucharist to nurture and nourish us as we distribute Holy Communion to the faithful. For someone who is a hospitality minister, that integral formation might include, how do I exercise hospitality away from the church so that my entire life is a life of hospitality, not just when I do that ministry here at Sacred Heart. That integral formation, much broader, pastoral, spiritual, human. How am I striving to grow in my human relationships with the people who are in my life away from here, but also here in the parish? If I am called to and step forward and offer myself in service to the people of this parish, how do I grow in recognizing in the people around me the presence of Christ? That's an issue of human formation. We work on this a lot in our seminaries, especially in our college seminaries. We have 18 to 22-year-old young men living at Bishop Rute College Seminary who don't always recognize in their brothers who are living down the hall from them the person of Jesus Christ, because they're college young men and they're human beings. And a big part of what we try to help them to do is to recognize in the people they meet there in the seminary or on the campus at Marian University or in the parishes where they go to serve, to recognize the person of Jesus Christ. And if you have a disagreement with somebody in the seminary, you're going to work it out and figure out how to move through that and to recognize in each other the person of Jesus Christ. That's human formation. The spiritual formation. What does my own prayer life look like that prepares me for service to the people of God here in this parish in the liturgy? The pastoral formation. How am I serving the needs of others? When I was in college, I've been active in liturgy for as long as I can remember. I started as an altar server. I joined the choir. I grew up at St. Jude on the south side. I joined the church choir when I was in high school. Started as a lector and extraordinary minister of Holy Communion in college, was a sacristan, did just about everything. And when I was in college, I went to LaSalle University in Philadelphia. And every year we had a service day for the university. It was called Branch Out Day, where on a given year, maybe 600-700 students would spend a Saturday doing service in our local community in the city of Philadelphia. And you would get together, sometimes it would be members of the fraternity or sorority, or the jazz band, or the science club, or a particular class would come together in a small group and go out to somewhere in the city of Philadelphia to do service for a day. Our campus ministry center always brought together our liturgical ministers on that branch out day. And it was very intentional when our brother Chip Eckelmeyer, who's a Christian brother, was very intentional about what we did. Our liturgical ministers would come together, and we would go to a home in Philadelphia that was a home for single mothers who didn't have anywhere else to live. So single mothers with young children who had either been kicked out of their homes or didn't have a job and were trying to get back on their feet. And there's a parish that ran this house for single mothers and young children to live. And part of the agreement for these mothers and their children to live in this house was that they were responsible for cooking all of their own meals. Well, every year we would go to liturgical ministers to prepare a meal for them. And that was what we did all day. And it was usually spaghetti and meatballs, homemade sauce, salad, garlic bread, and just this big pasta meal that we would prepare. And Brother Chip each year would tell us, this is why we are doing this and not one of the other groups. Because those of us who serve at the altar in church need to also serve at the table of those who are poor or hungry or in need. We need to make a connection between the service that we do at this altar, nourishing people with the body and blood of Christ, and serving the physical hungers of people. And so preparing a meal was really important for him and his leadership and formation of us as liturgical ministers. That the ministry we do here should connect to what we do out in the world. That's pastoral formation and making connections between what we do here and what we do away from here. I think that's important for us in our formation for liturgical ministries. There are two other ways that in priestly formation we talk about this integral formation, besides integrating these different areas of formation, so that's human, spiritual, pastoral, and intellectual. One is that we integrate our fallen human nature with the grace of God that is given to us. So we recognize that we are not going to be perfect, and that we make mistakes, and we fail, and we sin. But we need to integrate that with the grace of God that is given to us, especially in the sacraments. And so recognizing that there are parts of our ministry and parts of our life in our parish that are not what they should be. And that there are some times when our lector might say a reading from the letter of St. Paul to the Philippines, where God is rendering the mountains. And that's okay. It's not okay. It's not ideal, but it's who we are. It's part of our fallen human nature. But we need to receive God's grace in order to grow and integrate our fallen human nature with the grace that God gives us, which means being open to what God is doing in our lives. That it is not my ministry. I saw on Twitter, I'm not on Twitter much. I never post on Twitter, but I go and look every once in a while just because other people are there, and it's good to know what's there, I feel, in working with our seminarians, to know what's out there. I don't like Twitter, but I look at it. And I saw a post on Twitter this week. Somebody I do not know and may never meet. And I apologize to this person here because I've never met this person and I'm going to say something about this person. But it was somebody else retweeted this. It was a new seminarian who's getting ready to go to seminary and saying, please pray for me as I start my vocation to the priesthood. And I don't like that word my. It's not my vocation to the priesthood. It's not my priesthood. Now, I would wonder if this young man who's starting the seminary, he's not from this diocese, I don't even know where he's from. I wonder if he even thinks through some of that, or has thought through that. I think some of it might be a generational thing. But it's not my vocation. It's not my journey to the priesthood. And maybe I'm getting a little too nitpicky, but it's God's grace working through us. It is a priesthood of Jesus Christ that we are called to exercise. It's not my ministry. It's how I'm called to serve God and God's people. And so I sometimes think it's good to pay attention to the language that we use. The last area of integration that we talk about in priestly formation is integrating initial and ongoing formation. In terms of priestly formation, initial formation is what happens in the seminary. Ongoing formation is what happens after we're ordained. And what this says is that once we are ordained priests, we need to continue to be formed in order to be the priest God calls us to be, in order to serve God's people well. We need to continue to read and to study and to pray and to go to workshops and to conferences and to grow and to learn in order to serve God's people well. what we learn in seminary will help us when we first get ordained, but we need to continue doing that. And I think the same is true for our liturgical ministries. When somebody first volunteers or is invited to participate in a liturgical ministry, there is usually some initial formation or initial training. And this is the formation, the training in order to help get started in this ministry. But I think it's also important to do some ongoing formation, which is part of what we're doing here today. Some of that ongoing formation might be done as a group in a parish, whether it's reminders about some of the practicalities of doing our ministry here in this parish. Reminders about the dignity and the importance of this ministry and the importance of following through to what we've committed to, or simply growing in our own spiritual lives. That's ongoing formation. I know some people who very proudly will say, I've been a whatever liturgical minister it is. I often hear this with extraordinary ministers of Holy Communion, but I hear it with others too. I've been an extraordinary minister of Holy Communion for 25 years, and I was trained 25 years ago, and I know exactly what I'm doing. I just show up and do what I do. And that's a great gift to be able to serve the people of God in that way. I think along the way we need to renew ourselves and allow God to renew us and continue to grow in the ministry that we do. So both initial and ongoing formation. So why is this formation important for those who are involved in liturgical ministries? First, as I've said already, a part of it is knowing the particularities of this ministry in this particular parish. Knowing what we do here. The details of how an extraordinary minister of Holy Communion serves here at Sacred Heart is going to be different than at Nativity, where I serve as pastor. The details of those who set up for the liturgy are going to be different here than in another parish. We need to know the particularities here. But I think it's also important to know how an individual ministry fits into the bigger picture of liturgy. How is what I'm doing as a lector, how does that fit in to what the liturgy is as a whole? So knowing how things fit into the bigger picture. Formation is important in order to help us give the best we have to God. When we're called to liturgical ministries, we're called to serve God. And we want to give God the best that we have. Musicians might be a good example. Not everyone is called to be a liturgical musician. Not everyone has the particular skills, God-given skills and talents to be a liturgical musician. But those of us who have been given those gifts and those talents, we want to give God the best that we have. Each person is going to do that in different measure. Every person's voice is different. Every person's training on piano or organ or whatever it might be is going to be different. But we want to give God the best we have and continue to grow in our ministry. And so formation is important to learn how to give God the best we have. I think it's also important to do ongoing formation so we don't become complacent in our ministries. So that as we engage in ministries over a period of time, I think it's easy for any of us in any type of role. I think it's easy for us as priests to do. When we're celebrating the Mass daily, it can be easy for us to become complacent and to say the words and not really have any heart behind them. When we introduced the third edition of the Roman Missal, one of the best things that did for us as priests is it forced us to pay attention to what we were doing. Because before that, many of us, we've been celebrating enough Masses that I didn't need to look at the book. For the Eucharistic prayer, I had the Eucharistic prayer memorized. I didn't need to look at the book, which meant that I could say the words, and really I didn't even think about what was coming out of my mouth sometimes. So introducing that new translation forced us to pay attention to what we were doing. I think that was a good thing, because we can become complacent. I'd say as a priest who celebrates multiple Masses each weekend, it's difficult. It can be difficult to celebrate multiple Masses each weekend in a way where we are really putting our full selves in service to God and to the people. By the third Mass, sometimes I'm thinking about what's for lunch. I mean, we're all maybe thinking about what's for lunch when we're at Mass, but when you're a priest celebrating multiple Masses in a weekend, it's like, okay, I've heard these readings several times already. I know that Elijah is either going to rend or render the mountains. We're going to figure out which one, but then he's going to hear a tiny whispering sound. I know what's going to happen. And so it's easy for us to either get distracted or become complacent, even on a given weekend. And so ongoing formation can refresh us and renew us in the ministry that we do. And then finally, as I've said before, doing ongoing formation can be a way of reminding us that it's not about me. My ministry is not about me. It's about serving God and serving God's people. A final story from me, and then we're going to have some conversation about the particular ministries that are represented here. 2015? When did Pope Francis come to the United States? 2015 or 16, one of those. I think it was 15 maybe. Pope Francis came to the United States for the World Meeting of Families, which is in Philadelphia. I was invited to be the chaplain for a group going from the Archdiocese to the World Meeting of Families. It was really a beautiful thing. We had invited people from around the Archdiocese to gather for a pilgrimage, but had limited space available, and so people were selected representing different types of families, different parts of the Archdiocese, different parishes, different ethnic backgrounds, so that we had a really good, diverse representation of the people of the Archdiocese. We had single people, we had some young adult couples who were dating, we had newly married, we had whole families together, we had more elderly couples, we had widows, all different kinds of people were there for this World Meeting of Families. So we went to Philadelphia, had this World Meeting of Families. It ended with a vigil on a Saturday with Pope Francis, where the type of thing where you show up at 8 o'clock in the morning to claim your spot along the street for Pope Francis to drive by at 6 p.m. And I literally stood on the same part of sidewalk from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. with a great family from Batesville the entire day. And Pope Francis drove by and you waved at him, and then that was it. Well, on Sunday, there was a closing Mass with Pope Francis on Benjamin Franklin Parkway. If you're familiar with Philadelphia, the rocky steps that lead up to the Art Museum, right at the bottom of the rocky steps, it's at the end of Benjamin Franklin Parkway. That's where they built a stage for the altar for this closing Mass for the World Meeting of Families with Pope Francis. And there were, I don't know, 1 million or so people gathered along the parkway for this closing Mass. Well, I had the opportunity to celebrate for that Mass, was with Monsignor Bill Stump, our Vicar General for the Archdiocese. And they had us vesting inside the Philadelphia Art Museum, which is a really neat experience. The Art Museum was closed except for you vest in the galleries of the Art Museum because that was a space that was there. And then you have to get there 3 hours early in order to get seated. You had to be seated in our priest section an hour before Mass started. These are long days. And so we get all lined up, we go out, and we get to the area where they're having for the priests for this Mass with Pope Francis. Now, there are a lot of trees on the Benjamin Franklin Parkway in Philadelphia, and they didn't want to get rid of any of the trees just for a one-time Mass. So what they did is they put the stage, it had this sort of shell above it, like you see for outdoor stages or concert venues, and there was a flat enough area for the stage to be built. And then they built platforms in the trees for the priests on either side of the stage. We were about, I don't know, maybe 12, 15 feet off the ground on these platforms, big, huge platforms built. You had to go up the stairs to get, and we were about, I'd say the main level of the stage was maybe 6 feet off the ground, and so we were another, I don't know, 8, 10 feet or so higher than that, in the trees. And the stage was below us, so if I'm here looking out, the stage was out there and lower down. And we get there, we find our seats. Monsignor Stump and I were maybe about 10 rows back from the front. And we start looking around, and we realize we are not going to be able to see a thing. I mean, one, there are trees all around, but the altar was lower than us and in front of us. All we could see was the back of the priest in front of us, and then the front row were the bishops. put the bishops in the front row with their mitres, their hats, blocking everybody's view who was behind them. And there was, you could not see anything of where the Pope was going to be for the Mass. You could not see the altar. We looked around thinking, well, maybe they have these big screens, because they had big screens all for people all along the parkway to watch the Mass. There are no screens that we could even see what was going on. Here we are, celebrating Mass with the Pope, and we're not going to see the Pope or the altar. And there were speakers so we could hear what was going on, but all we're seeing is the back of the priest sitting in front of us. It's like, well, this is pretty sad, and not quite what we were expecting. So we sit there for an hour, waiting for Mass to start. In the course of that hour, realize, okay, yes, all we're seeing is the back of the priest in front of us and the bishop's hat. But high above the altar was the crucifix. Behind the altar in the back of the stage, high above, you could see Jesus on the cross. I thought, really, we're here to celebrate the Mass, not here to see the Pope. Yeah, it's good to see the Pope. Saw the Pope drive by the night before. But we can see Jesus. We can see Jesus. And that's what's important. It's keeping our eyes fixed on Jesus. And sometimes it takes reminders like that it's not about what we are wanting or what we are trying to do or what we desire. It's not my Mass. It's not my ministry. It's about Jesus and keeping our eyes fixed on Jesus. And so, look to Jesus on the cross throughout that Mass. And it was a pretty neat experience. For our last conversation here this morning, we'd like to divide and find the other people who are involved in the same ministries as you. So lectors get together, musicians get together, hospitality people get together, so all the different liturgical ministries. And to spend some time talking about what does this ministry mean to me? How can I grow and improve in this ministry? How can I continue to be formed in this ministry? And how might you invite others and mentor others in this ministry? So we're getting very specific about our ministries here at Sacred Heart. What does it mean to be involved in this ministry? How can I grow in this ministry? What is going well in this ministry? What could we grow in? And how can we invite and mentor others? So there's a lot going on there. But each of these groups, at the end of the conversation, we'd like to have somebody report to the group, to the whole. And so be prepared for that. We're going to invite somebody from each group to say, well, tell us about your ministry. What does this ministry mean? How can you continue to grow? How can you invite others to participate in these ministries?